I know. Can I also ask, like, if you have a dirty dish in the sink, do you also consider something that's legitimately filthy also infamous? Because that's a really weird use of that word.
Yeah, I mean, if it's in the sink and it's causing everybody to look at it because it's just sitting there in the sink, it becomes infamous, right?
Yeah, if you're part of the Nachi Giovanni Academy, just know Anakundal thinks that you are a dirty dish in the sink.
This is the
Bhangra
podcast.
Sid, will you please welcome us?
Welcome everybody to this episode of the Bhangra podcast. We have everybody with Saab on the call right now. We are here to talk about the first 5 seasons of our Best Sets of the Decade podcast. Everybody, you want to say what's up?
My name is Ram. What's up?
All right, hey everyone, this is Naina.
What's up, y'all? This is Umer.
Hello, this is Anil.
So on this episode, we are going to be going through the first 5 seasons of the decade, so 2010 through the end of 2015. And we're going to talk about some of the best performances from each season. We'll talk about each one that we put, we all gathered our own crowdsourced best performances from each season. We talked about them. We came to a conclusion on which one was the best performance of that season. So we'll go season by season here, and I'm going to hand it off to Naina to go through the actual structure.
So we had some rules that we put in place for how we were going to choose. We're only choosing from music sets. They can be from anywhere in the world. So it can be, American set. It can be an Australian set. It doesn't matter as long as it's a music set. So there's some really phenomenal live sets from the last 10 years, but we're not going to be putting those into this list. We are also eventually going to structure this as a bracket, very like March Madness style. And in the final bracket, there can only be a maximum of 2 sets per team in the final bracket. The season, as we are defining it, runs from August of one year to July of the following. The only other thing that I would add is that we are picking the best set from one particular season. So even if it is better or worse than anything in a different season, it's only be compared to the other sets that are in that time span that we've designated as a given season. And so the first season that falls under our decade is the 2010 to 2011 season, and the very last one we'll be covering in the next episode will be the 2019 to 2020 season. So for 2010 to 2011, Bram, you want to start us with what teams we've got on the table here?
Yeah, so we had 4 teams that we were really thinking about this year. The 4 teams, I would say, 2010, 2011, it's pretty far back, but they were very memorable for different reasons. NJ at Bhangra Idols is probably one of the greatest, in my opinion, intro subsegments of all time. It's also one of the most chaotic performances I've ever seen. There's a little bit of everything in there. I mean everything. If you haven't watched the video, you should go watch it. There's hockey at the beginning of that performance. But there are moments of genuine, amazing creativity mixed in with some of the most questionable Bhangra decisions I've ever seen, personally. There's JJ at VPD, which is on a completely different end of the spectrum. It's a pretty outstanding performance from front to back. The dancing and the movement, which I think was atypical of JJ at the time, was incredible. They beat a very strong NYPD team at that competition. And the dancing quality, mixing a lot of the DMV's best talent, it's probably honestly one of the most talented rosters of dancers that we're ever going to see. Nachi Giovanni Warriors at Bhangra Musti 4. That's actually one of those routines. I look at that performance now, and I'm sure if you're a viewer and you go watch that performance could come back with some minor adjustments and probably win some competitions today. The choreography, some of the elements are very similar to some of the design choices that we make as a circuit today. And that's saying something, because that is 10 years ago. The dancing quality is great. They had a very awesome subsegment, as well as a very cool Kunde and Chimta segment. However, there is one last Canadian team that was, in my mind, and I think the rest of our minds, the best team, and that was SGPD at Elite Eight. Sid, why don't you talk about SGPD at Elite Eight and what made them so fantastic?
So SGPD Elite Eight 2011 is our choice for that season, and again, that season is the 2010 through 2011 season, and it's a multitude of reasons. I still think that it's one of the greatest performances I've ever seen. Like, there's a feeling that you get when you watch that performance that you're just like beyond wow. And being there live, I guess I also have a leg up in terms of understanding the feel of what happened that day. When they walked on stage, like when they walked under the little banner and they were just walking to their first spot, you could just look at all 16 dancers and you just knew that it was over. Like, they came to play, they came to rip everybody else's hearts out, and they absolutely delivered. It's another thing also that I'll say from a performance value perspective is that the aura of the dancers was just so capturing. It was so mesmerizing because the way that they danced, if you watch on video, the way that they danced and how crisp and clean that they danced was not as clean or crisp as PCBCA from that night. But it did not look that way at all if you were a live viewer. Maybe as a judge because you don't have that audience level just frame of mind. But from the audience perspective, it didn't look like they were any less clean than PCBCA. And that's something to be said about how you perform Bhangra. And then from a set construction perspective, there's so much from that set that is still being done today. That was the first time that we saw whenever the pink Jody and red Jody did that little running thing up through sups, that second drop during the sup segment where that idea of the mechanism, and they were opening their sups at each other. Like, that was one of the first times that we saw a team use something like that. They had different flavors throughout the entire set where, there was a lot of just choreographical based ideas through the sub segment. Then it was completely about the formations during the Carto segment. So they had different layers and they added gimmicks, right? So there's multiple ways that they were creative throughout the entire routine. It set so many trends from there on. Like, everybody was using their songs, everybody's using their ideas. Like, where that idea came from, and it came from that set. So that's why we picked SGPD at Elite Eight 2011.
Yeah, one thing I would want to add on there, I feel like there are a couple more SGPD performances, or this is like the beginning of the end of what we call the traditional SGPD powerhouse. What really stood out, if you watch this performance, is the mix of, I think, very traditional dancing, or quote unquote what was traditional or folk dancing at a time, with very, very modern elements. There's a lot of gimmicky stuff in that performance, and it's very hard to classify SGPD as either this quote folk or modern team that a lot of people like to have the conversation around, right? I think of all the teams in that year, they don't really fall underneath a specific bucket, and SGPD is a style of its own. And while a lot of teams, I think, can fit into some common stereotypes or common tropes when it comes to dancing, SGPD, if you watch the performance, it might not translate to what is happening right now within the circuit, but it's a very, very unique and different performance and a different style of set construction and dancing than a lot of the other teams that we discuss on this list.
To kind of go off of that, as somebody who didn't really grow up watching these sets, because I think I was in the 5th grade during this time, and she had idols. There's this one video that I watched. It's like a shaky cams, 480p, like literally a square, pretty much a square, and they had the dumbest, but like dumb in a good way, ideas I've ever seen performed in a set in my entire life. They did this thing where they started they did Let's Fly. And then they all got up and they did this plane thing, and then they did an entire segment around Kabuto Charles, and I thought that was just such a slick idea that they did. They had just so much formational movement that were absolutely fantastic, and it's really weird to think that this is NJ. Just knowing where NJ is now and comparing it to back then, they're honestly completely different teams. I don't know. It's just it was just amazing to watch, and I really wish that level of formational creativity was more apparent in today's circuit than it was back then.
I also have always found it funny watching and comparing NJ Idols and Nati Giovanni Warriors at Bhangra Masti and trying to reconcile that these two dancing teams came from the same place. If you watch these performances back to back, you will have not thought that these two groups of dancers both competed together.
Yeah, and on to 2011 and 2012. The few performances that we pulled in from there. First, I want to talk about Bhangra Nights at Bruin 2012. The reason that one comes up is because that was the first time ever the projector gimmick was done. So for all of you who do not know, the use of projector was not a thing until BK did it at Bruin 2012, and is still arguably the best use of it to this day. The way that they integrated it into the set, there was a standing ovation before they were even done dancing, and it was solely because of that gimmick. So even though I'm not even sure if they placed or if they got third or not that year, because it was also the year that Empire dropped a dolly from the ceiling. So they had some stiff competition, but that gimmick alone, every single team thought that they had gotten some form of highway robbery because of that in itself. Next, we'll talk about the Elite Eight from 2012 that year. There was pretty awesome bit of hype coming into that one. Unfortunately, NYPD was the only Toronto team that could come to that Elite Eight, but they still did an excellent job. JJ is one of the performances that we had up for being the best performance of all time, and that could be the best case for going first in a lineup being we're screwing you out of winning or placing it as a whole, because they did an excellent job. It was an unbelievably stacked dancing team. They danced really well. They performed really well. Formations were incredible, but they did lose to another team on our list, which is UNC at Elite Eight 2012. They were the college team that came out of nowhere. I think it's worth noting that they didn't get an Elite Eight invitation until like 2 weeks before the show, or 3 weeks before the show, some ridiculous amount of time before the show, because SJPD dropped out, and that team that they pulled in off the street, quote unquote, came in and won the competition. They were on a tear that year. They did, but them pulling out the band was one of the most just ridiculous gimmicks that ever happened to that point. Because I remember I had one guy that many of you know is Harmon Buell. He was one of our co-captains on FCB. He tied JJ's bugs, and he was texting me throughout the entire show at Elite Eight because I was not there that year. And all of a sudden, he stopped texting me during UNC's set, and he's like, they brought the entire UNC band. I was like, that's ridiculous. They did not bring like 85 people, Harmon. What the hell are you talking about? And he was like, Sid, they might win. And I was like, really? Because he thought JJ was going to win, but he was like, Sid, they might win because of that band. And then they did. So definitely big shout out to them. But the ultimate winner in our eyes for 2011 and 2012, the best overall performance from that season was AEG Boston.
Yeah, AEG at Boston that year is the first time that AEG did the gimmick with revealing that they had a girl dancing the whole time. That performance, if you go back and watch that, I mean, everyone loses their mind. It's definitely got a lot of hard-hitting moments throughout the set as well. There's a lot of gimmicks that they, rolled out for the first time, including the, I don't know what they were, like ribbons connecting their gatos. It's also just like a really high octane set, it's a really high energy throughout from all the dancers. It's not the cleanest, but they had so many moments that I think really were well received by the Boston crowd. But definitely the one to top all of those is when Navi Sandhu took off her pug, and it just like, I don't know, I still watch that performance, and it definitely means a lot to me as like a female dancer, but I think it just did a lot to show the rest of the circuit that this tacit assumption that there was some difference between girls and guys dancing was like just destroyed in that moment. And she just is such a sick dancer that I think that's like a memorable moment for so many people, even this many years later.
And I think something that does go by the wayside when it comes to talking about AEG's history is that that group of dancers was unbelievably talented. Like that season was arguably AEG's best dancing group they ever had, and that's how good Navi was, right? Like we always knew how good Navi was when she was dancing on SMD because she was their top Geordie and captain at the time, and then obviously it was a shock to everybody that that they actually did it, and then we found out it was Navi, and it was like, oh, like that makes perfect sense because she is that sick, that she blended so well. So other things from that year is, I know NYPD's Elite Eight performance did not make it into the list, mostly because of Jay. We all of us only had two options, right? We could only pick two performances, but I think NYPD's deserves a shout out because they did extremely well there.
That mix was really good.
Mix was fire. The gimmick with the what the hell were those things on their feet? The ankle wraps, and when they were sliding around on their feet. That was freaking nasty.
That was amazing. Oh,
that was nasty. And again, it's arguable that they could have won that comp, but they were messy compared to the other two teams, and the judges, from what I heard, took issue with the ending gimmick.
Wait, what do you mean? That was the year they did the Spartan thing, right?
Yeah, like
why wouldn't you take an issue with that gimmick? That was the worst gimmick I've ever seen in my entire fucking life.
Regardless of it being worse, regardless of it being bad or not, regardless of it being bad or not, right? I think
What do you mean by taking issue then?
They thought that NYPD was making some sort of religious context, like religious thing, which again, is
okay, that's fair.
I mean, to me, it was a stretch to even think that. It's like, how do you not know that this is a 300 gimmick? But
I do also want to say that there's AEG Boston. There's also AEG the year after at Bruin was also fantastic. AEG for that 3 or 4 years was great. One of the most underrated aspects of AEG, and something that I think that they were incredibly, incredibly good at, was they were the ultimate hype beasts when it came to previewing and promoting their performances. They would say the most ridiculous things to everybody about what was coming, and you had no idea what was going to be on stage. I remember specifically multiple competitions, members of the AEG saying that we are going to dance 8. We don't know if we're going to make it on stage tomorrow. Like casually talking about like animals on stage. Is it cool to do this on stage? Is it cool to do that? Like just the most ridiculous things.
Is this the origin of why Sid always asks, "What can we bring a live animal on stage?"
No, that is actually a question that Vancity asked at a mixer for Bruin.
Yeah, that's why
we will.
I stole Vancity's idea.
We will touch upon it. That's a different year, but AEG had a tendency to spread the most ridiculous rumors about themselves, and it worked in their favor because they were doing also ridiculous things.
But I think it's really funny that none of the things that they were saying were going to happen, like the Venn diagram of ridiculous things that they thought would maybe happen and ridiculous things that actually happened, like those are just two different circles. Like there's no overlapping there.
It was, I find it funny that with all the great performances that AEG got that is one of the biggest takeaways that I remember from that time. Specifically, people like Unkush or Unker telling me that they're barely going to scrape away with this performance. It's going to suck. This is so bad, et cetera, and then winning Bruin the next day.
Yeah,
Bruin not even just winning Bruin.
Yeah, Bruin.
Not even winning Bruin 2011. Just beating everybody so badly at that competition.
Yeah,
and then in the lobby just shrugging their shoulders and being like, looks like it came together in the end, guys.
The bog at the mixer is like, yeah, I'm not dancing tomorrow. I'm just here to have fun. And then the next day you see him in full Vardina bug. Is like, okay, dude. Unkush is like, yeah, I don't know where Kinnell is. Like, he hasn't landed yet. Like, he hasn't texted me in like 5 days. I don't know if he's coming. Like,
that could be true.
I mean, it could be true. But there he was dancing the next day.
All right. So 2012 to 13 season, I think where we're at now. Well, I guess to start, as we just discussed, AEG at Bruin 2013. That was a crazy set, again, in terms of just like high octane moments. The laser Kunde, like no one saw that coming. And then the uncle that they brought out at the end is top 10 endings of all time. That dude marked it. I also want to shout out Cornell at WBBC. That really put them on a lot of radars because it was a collegiate team that just won over all these other teams that were definitely favored to, if not win, at least beat Cornell, and that did not happen. It's a really packed set. They fit in as many gimmicks as humanly possible. Tossing subs, magically appearing Kunde. Is that the set where they did like 32 Mirzas?
Yes, they did many segments that could be considered the Mircha.
No, he was making direct fun of Cornell and the way they danced.
Yes.
I'm not going to argue with that one. We've also got Bhangra Nights at World's Best Bhangra Crew 2013. That was, I think, one of the bigger moments from that set was the grenade gimmick, which was obviously a direct Fodge call out. Excellent use of that projector that they introduced the previous season. Arguably should have won WBBC, but that did not happen. And the set that we have crowned, the 2012-13 champs, is Fodge at Bell that season.
Yeah, and from the teams that Nina just listed and that we came, all these sets were really gimmick-heavy sets. And for me, it just came down to which performance really integrated their gimmicks well. One thing that everybody complains about nowadays with gimmicks is that, people have to stop dancing for their gimmick to work or for them to set up a gimmick. And that's one thing that Fodge did well at this performance, was that all their gimmicks they didn't have to stop dancing for. They just kind of it flowed with their set. Especially starting from the beginning where they had the sandbags on the stage that moved midway through subs. If you watch that segment, you'll see dancers that have to like not just go around the sandbags, but also like they choreograph hopping over it with certain moves. And even opening that sub segment, like for me, watching Cornell pull out Kunde out of nowhere, like being like a magic geek and somebody who's really into that, I was like, oh, whoa, that's really cool, but I know how they did it. And then when I saw Fodge at Bell, it's like, where the hell does subs come from? They're just dancing out there, they turn around, and boom, there's subs out of nowhere. And that was one thing that really sold that set for me. Further down, like their Jummer, like having, I believe, how many Bertkas in a Jummer that they did? Straight, like 12 to 16 Bertka. But still made it look flawless, they made it look clean. And at the end, obviously, coming out with that tank is just, it's iconic. And not just one tank this year, but two tanks. It was very clean and hit well.
Yeah. I'm still like salty AEG at Bruin did not win this.
You just have a crush on Priyanka Chopra. That's about it.
No, that is absolutely not. I thought that was
I mean, there's also something to be said about that Bell. Fodge beat AEG. AEG they tested a lot of their, not a lot, but tested a few of their Bruin gimmicks at that Bell. I highly recommend everybody watching that Bell because it's kind of a funny performance for AEG.
You remember? It took them like 240 beats to make Priyanka Chopra's face at that Bell.
Yeah, and then they also blindfolded themselves for their entire Kunde segment, which went horribly.
Yo,
you just remember, but like they were still a good dancing team. They did some interesting things. They knew they weren't going to place after that. But
are you sure they're a very good dancing team?
They danced well, right? But and JJ was obviously also a very good dancing team that night. That's also a great mix. Shout out to that performance. A couple of performances and just teams overall from that season. Cal was riding a high from the year before, and then they kind of fizzled out towards the end of this one. But they beat some good teams along the way. I remember winning Berg and beating Tag and Cornell at Berg that year. I think this was also like the first season where Van City really came on. They had Idols and had Bruin that year because they got second to AEG that Bruin. But yeah, going back to what you were saying though, Umar, Fodge just absolutely just wrecked.
You're not wrong. That was even though I have danced later along in the circuit's lifespan. Cringe is a strong word, but I mean, you understand when I watch these older performances, it's a little bit harder to appreciate.
The style has just really changed a lot from some of these.
Exactly. Like it's dancing overall has just gotten a lot better than what the bar for dancing was back then. But even if even watching that Fodge at Bell performance, this is actually still very, very good. And so like they absolutely did wreck it.
Two things. One, if you're out there and you're wondering, how do I get away with beating up somebody on my team and making it look like a complete accident? The solution is obviously create a Kunde segment and blindfold everybody.
Did you watch that? Did you just go back and watch that, Ron?
I did it on my phone just now. And
Yeah.
just put you and the person you don't like next to each other and just dance.
Dude, it was like I felt bad, but it was hilarious live.
Secondly, didn't Fodge at Bell have the whole situation with Cannell's cell phone? There was like a thread devoted
Oh
to
yeah.
how his cell phone fell out of his pocket and like slid across stage multiple times, and he still managed to find it at the end of the performance, and it still
what
worked.
pocket?
Why was he holding? Yeah, what?
He forgot to
What
take
pocket?
his
There's
phone
no
out of his
pocket on
pocket.
Worthy.
They had,
Where
no,
did the
they,
subs
they
come
had,
from?
They
Nana,
have pockets.
Some boys
No,
wear
no.
shorts.
So
under their
because
joggers.
no. I also think it's because they got custom made pockets in their vests.
Oh, like
Because they were
gimmick
doing-
pockets.
I thought it was just in his
No.
shorts.
Because they had to
Gimmick
do the whole
pockets.
inside out. They had to do the whole inside out thing, right? So Cannell's just one of those people who would do this. Right? Like, he's pretty sure he stitched pockets in his vest, which is brilliant, right? But he left his phone in there and then spun and it slid out. And it like makes an appearance, and it was like he turned it into a GIF, and it was a meme, and there was like a story around it about how it like fell out, and it got slip and slided all over the place, and then he picked it up at the end, and I think it still worked. But there's a thread about that. If people can find it, if you're listening to this, it's incredible. It's crazy how great old iPhones were from a reliability standpoint.
So moving on into the 2013-2014 season, one of the teams we did come up with, or we want to talk about, was Cornell at WBBC. This was really big because after they placed first and beat out a huge upset over many teams at the WBC prior to that, the rubric became quote-unquote Cornell-proofed, and they still came out and beat out every other team that was there. I believe Ankile, they beat out JVD as well.
Vancity.
Vancity was there that year?
Vancity and AG were,
Okay.
were going
Was
at it.
was JVD there?
JVD was paired with UVA.
Oh, got it.
Guys, DCMPAA, their girls team battled their
That's
boys
amazing.
team.
Yo,
That was the
how do you-
matchup.
Like, how do you?
And did Unel even cover? I think he was supposed to cover before we just.
No,
No.
no, absolutely not.
Another team that we wanted to talk about was FCB at Berg, and that was just straight up a clean, flawless performance, placing first at their hometown. So that was just like a really nice performance. The last and the winner of this category for 2013 to 2014 was the infamous NJ at Boston performance,
Is
and
it infamous?
it's pretty filthy.
I mean, you know, I would say it's famous. I wouldn't say infamous. Infamous feel like I feel like if it's infamous, it's just like that's like Gajja Gabru Pioneer Bhangra.
How long?
Yes.
There it is.
Yeah, no, we really
it
should have
is.
set a bet for how long it was going to take for Uma to drop that set.
All right. Yo, so NJ at Boston in 2013. The reason this set was a very big, momentous performance within the circuit is just because it was one of the first times where going fast and dancing at such a high tempo, high BPM, like performed and did well. Prior to that, dancing fast was just honestly kind of shat on. You couldn't really do it and perform it well and actually could like have success with your performances. And so I know you said like there was a folk shift before, but I still feel like this is one of like the first sets where they had this folkness and it was well remembered.
I think it's fair to say that it's solidified the folk
Yeah,
shift.
like
it
it
might have already been happening, but it really, because Boston's also not the kind of comp where you're expecting a folk team to win. I think that really is what it is.
I mean,
You tell me, I
It's-
wasn't there.
here's the thing,
Yeah.
right? That NJ team that was very competitive was John, right? None of those guys danced at that point anymore. You had the Warriors team that if you go back and watch the 2010 Warriors team and you look at the 2013-2014 Boston performance, there are a lot of similarities. One of which is the dancers. Secondly is the coaches of the team. And thirdly, like a lot of the choreography and principles are the same. What makes it, very memorable is, to Nano's point, it's Boston, which had been known up until this point to be this weird, weird and
Emphasis
entertaining
on weird.
performances win.
Emphasis
Right.
on fucking weird.
I actually don't even know what Boston stands for as a competition ever, because it just selectively chooses every year to be just picking a team that in some cases may be contrarian to what was the year before. But then also too, it was I think a statement by a lot of the Canadian teams and the academy teams in particular, like Nutley Giovanni, the academy, saying that, hey, we're going to strip out a lot of what made Nutley great the last 4 to 5 years, and we're going to take this down a different direction. And then you saw every Nutley team from then on, which let's be real, there's like NJFL and insert whatever other letters you want to put after NJ, right? There's been like variations of that, and they've all followed the Warriors kind of mantra in that style versus the traditional NJ style, right? And I don't want to say this in a negative way, but I think the fact that the set was also very, very short, because Boston makes their sets very short, also made this a memorable set, because it allowed them to go really, really fast, do a lot of crazy and creative things, keep it to 6 minutes. It was like a perfect amount of time to do all the things that they wanted to do, right? I don't want to, people talk about it as some sort of like folk referendum. Like, it had already been there. Like this is discounting like the JJ at Elite Eight. It's not the same. It's a different pace and a different style, but it's still a very dance focused style. This is just the first time where one of those elite teams had kind of died, like the old school NJ team had died doing all this weird, I don't want to call it weird, but like very, very creative things that people would probably call weird or antithetical to what this new NJ team was like, and was being replaced by a team that was purely dancing. I still remember, I think, Bogle logging on a BTF and just saying, the old NJ is dead. We are not doing gimmicks or anything gimmicky anymore. We are only going to focus on dancing from here on out. And that was like a statement to everybody that, all the Toronto academies, like the NJ Academy in particular, was only going to focus on dancing, and that's all you're going to see, which was a huge shift, because it meant that a lot of these really high quality performances were now going to be one way in, one way only.
It changed what everybody viewed as what's possible when it came to energy, right? It definitely changed my mindset towards, being able to push myself as a dancer. Like, if those guys can do it, I'm definitely not pushing myself hard enough, right? It changed the game in very many ways. And
on that note, I will say that NJ in Boston is to me a double-edged sword when it comes to dancing on the Bhangra circuit. I think before that performance walks on stage, I would say like a collegiate team, an independent team, an academy were on a level playing field. You would still need to practice a lot, but you could put together competitive sets across a pretty wide set of creativity or set construction variables and still come out and potentially win competitions. And for those teams that really wanted to focus on dancing, like some of the teams that we mentioned before, you could still be very successful by practicing a lot and getting everybody on the same page and going out there with some tweaks and being competitive. And NJ just essentially said, fuck that. We're going to take all of the resources that we have on the academy side, all of the practice, all of the knowledge that we have, and we're going to make it almost in some ways untenable for people to be competitive with us. It shows like if you really invest and you get everything in the right position, you can put yourself at a level where in some cases people aren't going to be competitive, at least in that vein. Like, you're not going to be competitive on a dancing level with NJ. And I think that's still true today.
Guys, who are we going with for this last set?
Well, why don't we walk
Who the fuck knows?
through who's on the table first?
All right, so 2014, 2015 was a very contentious year for us in terms of trying to pick what was the best performance of the season, and we went back and forth on a lot of these performances. So we have GCC at TBC. Honestly, this was one of those breakout moments and breakout sets for the UK circuit as a whole. This was one of the first sets that really popped up on a lot of people's radars outside of the UK, just because of the crazy formational mechanisms and everything along those lines. FCB at Elite 8 at around 2 minutes, the music cuts off during the performance, and they perform the rest of the set without any music, and they only go off the dole. And that was a memorable moment for a lot of people in the circuit. And then for FCB at Brew in 2015, that entire season was very successful, placing and winning at multiple comps throughout that year. But they all kind of hit their peak at Brew in 2015 with Kunde dropping from the ceiling, the sound of the police segment, and at the very end doing the jumps all around LA on the projector in coordination with the people dancing at the end. SMD at Berg, also SMD that year just rolled through everybody, winning pretty much every single competition they went to. Most momentously, like winning at Berg, beating a very stacked lineup that year. Then there was also Van City at Bruin. They had a lot of creative ideas in that set, as well as momentously the platforms that they brought out onto stage and then danced on. All right.
So do we have a winner for this season, or are we still in hot contention over this?
I think we're still in hot contention over this, I guess.
So okay. I will say that I don't really know who I say wins. For me, it comes down to SMD at Berg and FCB at Bruin.
All right, so where's everybody at? Show of hands on the count of three.
On the count of three, raise your hand if you have a vote. Like, what is this?
FCB. Thumbs up if you're FCB, and thumbs down if you're SMD.
Wow.
I didn't mean it to be like that. It's just alphabetical.
Oh, okay,
it's
Ron.
alphabetical order. All right. 3, 2, 1. All right, it's SMD.
All right, I've got.
All right, so should we just say quickly, like, the votes for SMD were Ram, Sid, and myself, and Umar and Anil went with FCB at Bruin.
I would say, from an SMD perspective, and I think the reason I personally picked SMD, and part of the reason why I feel that Nana and Sid picked SMD is when you think about it from a performance standpoint, there is, I think, value in being flawless, but being flawless and making sure a lot of your ideas come through in your performance. I don't think SMD was striving. They were not striving to be memorable with their gimmicks or really be focused on enhancing and having the wow factor external to the dancing. It was all focused in the dancing itself. It was also set up in a way where those moments, while they might not be the most earth-shattering or mind-bending moments, there were a lot of them interspersed throughout the routine, and they were all done very well. And I also think that the team, one of the things that I personally feel is important for a team to be successful and a hallmark of a really excellent team is that, at any given moment, I thought the team was performing at the exact same level, right? When they do the chal towards the end and they move into the chal circle, it's like 6 minutes into the performance. There's a lot of, it would be fine if they were gassed and people kind of dogged it, right? But they didn't do that. The ending segment, it's fine to do your ending pose and not dip into it, and it would be fine if you dogged it a little bit, and they didn't do that. I thought the sub segment was really good. I thought the fact that they brought in some, there was the pot segment, there was the Ramals that came out. They played to their strengths. There's a lot of very Gidda-like elements sprinkled throughout their performance. But I thought that every single time they tried to do something, everyone executed it the right way. And in a lot of instances, it showed the power of taking ideas and doing them the best way possible. And that, to me, is very memorable. It might not be the thing that everyone remembers. It might not be the set that everyone remembers at the end of this, but it shows the power of how every single segment, every single move, if done correctly, can amplify a performance greater than its individual pieces.
One question I do have, just SMD at Berg is just in my personal opinion, just not the kind of set I really enjoy. So genuinely asking, not trying to be a dick here. What were those? What are the moments that stick out for you in an SMD performance? Because personally, me watching that, I don't we're talking about best performances, and one of my internal things for best performances are what are those hit memorable moments? What are those things that pop out to you that I can say yo, this performance was crazy. Remember that, remember that, remember that, remember that. Oh my God, you know? And, like, for SMD's performances, that especially that entire year, all like what I generally kind of say is like, dude, the level of sync and like execution was fantastic. But I don't think anybody really says, yo, remember that thing, you know? And I mean, maybe that's just like, I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong. I'm just saying, help me understand why you think this is the best performance that year.
Can I take that?
Or whoever takes that.
I think because I do agree to a lot of what you're saying, if not everything that what you're saying, Umer. But I think the issue of this specific season is while SMD was not aggressive at all with their routine when it comes to the set creation, they executed flawlessly with, I don't know, it was just damn near perfect, right? It was just the precision was excellent. And I think the rest of, looking at you have to compare it to everybody else. Where it's a combination of how well you execute your set and the set creation, right? And I think that everybody else just, didn't do enough to beat out SMD. Like, given everything that we are saying, given everything that you have said, why are we still having this conversation? Right? That's what it really comes down to for me. It's like, why are we still having this conversation? Is because everybody else made too many mistakes or did enough things in their performance to bring them down. And again, we talk about an overall performance.
See, and I guess for like again, like the reason I'm having a hard time saying that SMD was the best performance that year is because, yeah, there were plenty of mistakes in all these performances, but that for me does not take away from, like, at the end of the day, the impact of those performances was so dramatic that like I still can give it to them. And again, that's just a me thing. Clearly, I'm outvoted. I don't mind, but that's where I have a hard time reconciling saying SMD was the best performance.
I think the other thing too is from a performance, it is important to bring up the things that you talked about, Omar, mm-hmm. right? Like the memorable performance. People mm-hmm. do want performances to be memorable. Mm-hmm. I would say the hardest thing for me when I watch the SMD performance is not so much that I could have thought of all those things. I definitely could have thought of all those things. I just question if I could pull together a really good FCB team, like a fantastic FCB team, if we could do it as flawlessly as they did it. And that's like a very valid point that I think is lost when you think about how good that performance is mm-hmm. for that year. Is, you made the comment yourself, right? Like Berg 7 is the only time where you have never messed up. Mm-hmm. And we have been around for 7 years. And yeah. SMD did it for 3 straight competitions in 1 year. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a lot of intrinsic value in taking very simple things and doing it better than anyone else can do it, which is what stuck out to me about that performance. Is I thought that if other teams did it, they wouldn't do it as well.
That's the thing. I think that's what's really interesting with like even these teams that we're comparing from this season, FCB and SMD. If you took SMD dancers and had them dance FCB's set, that would win everything. And if you took FCB's dancers and had them dance SMD set, they would not win. And so it just comes down to like, as people, what do we value? And as like comps, what did they value in that lineup in that season? And I think people are allowed to have different preferences in terms of what they think is important.
Totally.
Just remember, Empire at Warrior Bhangra 2014 has 9 million views. That's 9 million views. And so there's also a small part of me that it has to respect what I feel is what the audience wants to see. When you're choreographing your routine, you're not just making it for yourself or making it for your friends who are also Bhangra dancers who might find it very cool and attractive, but you're also making it for regular people who will watch that. And, I do think there's a lot of value in taking very simple choreography and formations with small tweaks and doing it much better than everybody else. I think that shows a level.
I would say right there, though, you're contradicting yourself because I think people would I think the reason Empire performances do very well, I mean, other than the fact they literally have an academy with like a huge social following and all that stuff, it's because they have a lot of fancy, shiny gimmicks and really big, wow, oh my God, how did they do that? How did they come up with that? That is amazing moments.
Yeah.
And so like,
they're also the best at doing that. Like,
okay. Yeah. But I mean, like, that's what I'm saying. Like,
But what I'm pointing out to is SMD's not. SMD's more on the dancing side of the house. And I still feel strongly that people who appreciate and want more of an art performance out of their Bhangra performances will probably prefer an SMD performance, because mastery of something is better than 75% of it, right? Like there are people who come to these shows who so random story. I had my English teacher come to watch our performance at Berg the year that we lost the Nut to the Giovanni. She still runs the senior play. She just still does musicals, and she just still does theater performances. And when I got off stage and the competition was over and before the awards were announced, I met her in the audience and another one of my English teachers who I had when I was in high school. And I asked them what they thought. And they thought everything was great. They thought it was super cool. And I asked them who they thought would win, and they said it was actually Giovanni because they were a better dancing team. And these are two white women from a middle school in Midwestern Pennsylvania who came and said they were a better dancing team, and they looked like they were a more authentic version of the dance, and therefore they should win. And there are more people like that out there that I think you know. And I think in part I have to respect the fact that people believe that.
I mean, the crowd at Bruin just wants something different from the teams that take the stage that night. And so same thing with like the crowd at Elite 8, for example, I think the crowd at Elite 8 is usually pretty heavily other dancers and people who like know what's up with the circuit. They're there to see like elite Bhangra performances. So when it comes to talking about what the audience wants, I think it's just exactly what Ram's saying. Like the audience wants a lot of different things depending on who they are. And that sometimes coincides directly with like what the judges value and what we as other dancers value, and then sometimes it just doesn't.
And with all of that, Ram, take us home.
So across the 2 episodes, we'll be dropping one performance from each season into a bracket. But we know we're missing some amazing performances in those 10. So to spice things up, we'll be throwing in 6 other performances from the decade into the final bracket as wildcards that you can vote on just the same as the other performances. And there will be a voting process after the next episode to decide the best set of the decade. There will be links on all our social media platforms filling out brackets, as well as explainers and instructions for how you can even win some money for yourself or your team by submitting said brackets. Omar, why don't you talk about what's coming up next?
So on this episode, we covered the first 5 years of the decade, and on the next episode, we will be covering the last 5 seasons of this decade. And then we will then put all those performances into a bracket, which y'all will decide the outcome of.
All right, so with that, we have got our first 5 seasons. We've got those decided, and we'll see you guys on our next episode for our next picks.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Bhangra podcast. Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts and Podchaser, as that really helps others find the podcast. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of them at the Bhangra Pod. If you want to know what else is going on in the podcast world, sign up for our newsletter and join our Discord server to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. There will be links to all of those in the show notes.